Okay, so now I have my elements of art booklet all prepared. I have my pineapple silhouettes drawn in there. Some of them are the more detailed version, some are the more simple version. And everything at this point is ready for me to go ahead and start illustrating each of the elements of art within that given space. So on my line example, which is right here, I am going to be focusing primarily on adding Zentangle design patterns within the pineapple to a degree, but mostly in the background around the pineapple. On the one here, which is shape, I am going to just break the background into some other shapes, and I have obviously the shape of the pineapple here. This next one is our value, and for this one I'm going to be, no, this one is color, I'm sorry, this one is color, so I'm going to be doing a gradient from cool colors on the pineapple and a gradient with warm colors on the background to showcase the different sets of colors. This next one is value, and is the one that I'm going to shade to make it look three-dimensional and actually have a full range of value. And then I will just do a gradient in the background. This next one here is going to be texture, which I'm going to be scrunching up and using sort of tissue paper chunks to have a texture literally on the surface of the pineapple, which will also mimic the prickly feeling of an actual pineapple. This one here is space, and in order to show space, what I've done is get a couple smaller silhouettes. So I've got the big one here in the front, furthest down on the page, and the biggest, which is going to make it look closest. This one here is the next biggest, and it's in between, it's behind the big one, so it's kind of in the middle ground. And then these two are smaller, and they're furthest up, which is going to make them look furthest away. And then this last one here is going to be form, and that one I am going to be altering sort of the drawn step of it before I start in with any designs or color. So I'm going to go ahead and start altering my form example first. And I think what I'm going to do is turn all of my leaves into cones. So I'm going to put a little ellipse on the bottom. So I'm going to leave them as sort of wonky cones. So I'm going to put another little ellipse over here. Let me zoom in a little bit so that you guys can see that better. So basically what I'm doing is taking the different parts of my pineapple and turning them into forms. I'm not quite sure exactly how I'm going to be adding color to this section yet, but I'm more concerned about getting the form part drawn on there at this point. Because before we even start thinking about color, we need to make sure that everything is drawn as completely as possible. So once I get all of my forms, or all of my leaves turned into forms, I should say, the next thing I'm going to do is just erase some of those lines that I no longer need anymore, which were from the actual leaves. So remember that the exact way that you turn things into the elements, the way that you choose to portray the elements is up to you, but you want to make sure that it is quite obvious which element is in each section. That's kind of the main goal here. There should be no question as to which element is which. So definitely make sure you spend some time figuring out how to portray each one. And definitely talk to each other, talk to me. We'll figure it out. And now on the body part, so to speak, of the pineapple, I'm going to turn it into cylinders. Almost as if it has been sliced. So then the next one down might kind of just go like this, so that if I were to continue that, I would see more of that top section. But because I'm kind of stacking them, almost like a wedding cake, I'm only going to see where it starts. So then I've got one more little one to add here. So then in that particular section, I have turned that pineapple into a series of forms. So I'm just going to then go in with an eraser and just erase the parts that were the leaves previously. Now at this point, I could also outline with an ultrafine tip Sharpie or some other micron pen or something like that before I erase. But right now, because I'm not completely sure exactly how I'm going to be finishing this yet, I'm just going to erase. If I knew I was going to be outlining, I would do that and then erase. Same thing down here where I have my little cylinders. Just going to erase the parts that were the original silhouette of the pineapple. So the now form is ready. Space, there's not a whole lot to change on it, simply because most of what I'm going to be doing is using color and value to emphasize that that is space based on the ways to create space that we have already talked about. Texture, there was also not much to add in terms of drawing at this point, because everything that I add is going to be an actual texture. So sliding on across here. In the value section, there's not much to add until I actually start shading. And quite frankly, because I do plan on using graphite on this one, I probably will do that one last, so that I don't smear graphite all over the rest of them. The color section, same thing, there's not a whole lot to change, because until I start adding color, it's pretty much going to look like this. On the shape section, I can go ahead and put other shapes into that background. So I am going to go ahead and do that. I'm just going to use the edges of my ruler and just do a really simple checkerboard. So I'm just going to line the edge of the ruler up with the paper, draw that across, and I'm just going to slide it down so that it's lined up with my line that I just drew on the top part of the ruler, and then draw another line on the bottom part, and then do the same thing for this one. And then I'm going to go vertically as well. I'll go this way. And you could definitely make a smaller checkerboard if you would rather measure. I just feel like it's good to use the ruler to simplify things whenever you can. So now I have basically, skipped a line here. I have basically just squares in the background, which create that checkerboard. And now if I felt like they were too small, I could go back in and make them small, or if I felt like they were too big, I could go back in and make them smaller by measuring. So for instance, if I put my ruler down here, I could actually measure every ½ inch and make a smaller type of grid in there. Or if I'm not too worried about the particulars of it, in terms of size, I could just add in some other lines there by finding a place on my ruler to line up. So right now I'm just kind of shifting my ruler around to find a place where I can use parts of the ruler. So here, the tops of the ellipses are on the edge of the paper, so I could draw that line across now to make that section smaller, and I'm not too concerned about it being perfectly even. And then down here I could do something similar to where the bottom of these numbers is on that line, and then I can draw that line across. Still just using squares and rectangles as my shapes. Gonna do the same thing on this part. Gonna put the bottoms of these numbers on that previous line and draw that horizontal line across. And then I'm just going to do the same thing vertically here. But I'll use the tops of my ellipses just for a little bit of a size difference. And then draw that line down. I'm not going to do it behind the pineapple simply because the pineapple covers that section. But now I've got shape in the background creating a pattern, which we will talk about in a little bit, because you will be writing on the back of these segments exactly how each element relates to the principles. And then in this section, I would go ahead and use an ultrafine tip Sharpie to outline all of my pineapple lines. And then I would go back in with some Zentangle designs in the background. And I do have a video for working with some Zentangle lines that I will post as well, so that you get some ideas for a Zentangle. But essentially a Zentangle is kind of like a Color Me Calm coloring book, where it's just different patterns and designs that are within different shapes and spaces. And that would be a good use of line for this particular example.